We are going to move on to our next category where we cover success in activism and advocacy as well. First, we have Zumretay Arkin, who's going to be joining us for a live session. She's going to be talking about, success in advocacy and how you can kind of help out your community as a youth. She is the Program and Advocacy Manager for Uyghur Congress. She graduated with a bachelor's degree in International Relations from Universite de Montre and later pursued a Bachelor of Law from Universite Laval. She is a spokesperson for the World Uyghur Congress, acting as a liaison with the press and the media. Her main focus is advocacy work, including meeting with members of parliament, governments, and officials to shed light on the injustices that Uyghurs in East Turkistan are facing. She is also frequently involved in the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, to address the plight of Uyghurs. In November 2019, she spoke at the 12th session of the UN Forum on Minority Issues on the theme of education, language, and the human rights for minorities. Zumretay Arkin, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm good, a bit tired, it's a bit late here, but
yeah, you joined us for our first session. We're so happy to have you here as well.
I'm glad to be here too, thank you.
Awesome. So if you want to start by telling us a little bit more about yourself personally, maybe something I wasn't able to touch on in the little bio.
Yeah, I think you covered pretty much all of the basics. But I just maybe wanted to point out that I was myself born in East Turkistan. I was born in Urumqi and immigrated to Canada when I was 10 with my family. Yeah, like you said, grew up in Canada as a Canadian, Uyghur Canadian. And I've kind of always knew about what was happening back home, and but I was pretty young, so like you kind of know, but not too in depth. And I think my wake up call was really like the turning point in my life or in my like activism advocacy is 2009, the Urumqi massacre, the Urumqi uprising, because we were there for summer holidays, and we actually arrived 3 days after the July 5th incident. And we were there on July 8th, and throughout the summer we just the political atmosphere was very tense, and it was my first time really experiencing the systematic racism towards Uyghurs, as we were being arrested and questioned at the airports because we were the only Uyghurs on board on the plane. And yeah, it was just kind of shocking for me because I was 16 back then, and just to see how much how our society was crippling with that racism, and how Uyghurs were suffering every day. And obviously that summer kind of was a turning point in Uyghur history as well. It was a dark period, and that kind of shifted things, and that kind of also was the turning point for the draconian laws that were introduced later on by the Chinese Communist Party. So for me, it was a really eye-opening, I guess, experience. And the silver lining in this is that I became really vocal about our situation, or the ongoing atrocities happening in our homelands. So when we went back to Canada, I just told myself that I couldn't really stay silent on this, because I myself am super interested in human rights and political science, international relations, all that. So it was impossible for me to just not do anything. So I really started, I think, becoming more involved in my community in Montreal, and just even in Canada, I guess. And I would always show up at protests, it always starts small, but then there's so many things you can do. And then I would help out with translation stuff, and all that things. And I kind of did volunteer work for Uyghur Canadian Society as well for some time. So all these things, and also my dad is a really fervent activist as well. So all these things kind of led up to me being interested in that cause, and especially because it's my people. And so that kind of, I guess, had an impact on what I also chose to study. My first bachelor's in international relations, that really got me interested in law and international law. And that's why I completed a law degree. And I really am like, my passion is really about human rights, international law. So I got this I actually graduated last year around this time, and when I went to Europe for a trip and then came back to Montreal, and I got this amazing job opportunity because they were looking for someone, and I knew the World Uyghur Congress from like previous years because I attended two of their previous trainings, one in Geneva and one in DC. And I kind of was then introduced to like the staff, like the people. So I guess I kind of had a glimpse of what they were doing and the important work they were doing. So I kind of jumped on this opportunity. I talked obviously with my family, and I just I just took a chance and moved here in September to Munich, Germany, and I've been here since then. And honestly, it's been super it's been incredible. It's been so it's a very challenging work, but I think it's also I've learned so much about just advocacy in general and how to carry advocacy in the most effective ways in international forums like the UN. Like I just remember my first time when I was at the UN, and I was completely lost because the thing is, like, I've studied this institution for many years. I know how it, I know how it works on paper. And then I arrived there and I was completely like paralyzed. I was like, what do I do? How do I is it rude if I speak to that person? Because you're surrounded by diplomats, by officials, and like high level people. And I was just really intimidated. But it's really through like help. Like you have to build yourself a strong network, because if I'm successful today in what I do, it's because of these people who taught me how to do it. And I still have a lot to learn. And but I do remember in February, I spent, I think, a month inside, like in Geneva, and working at the UN. And I was like, every time it was getting easier. And my last week, I attended the Human Rights Council, and that's like the highest level of a UN meeting in a year, because all of the countries around the world are present, and it's the Human Rights Council, which is like all of the urgent issues around the world that are happening. And I did an oral statement as well that time, and I remember that time I was like, okay, I got this. I was very like confident, and I was comparing myself to my first time where I knew nothing about like how, because even inside the room, you have to be careful of, even choosing the seats, you have to be careful because you can be kicked out for any reason, like small stuff. But so yeah, I think it's been challenging, but it's been a lot of good experiences and a lot of learning.
For sure. Yeah, that's amazing. So thank you for telling us a little bit about your path to, how you got to where you are right now. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about what your goals are with your activism?
Yeah, of course. I guess for me, it's like, it's not like smaller goals. It's really like the bigger goal, which is the goal for my people as well, is to close the camps and, to stop, for the Chinese Communist Party to stop the atrocities they're committing. And now with the new report that came out on the forced sterilization and forced abortions of Uyghur women, it's just one more, it's like an argument leaning towards genocide, and if not genocide, because it meets the criteria, one of the criteria for genocide in international law. Mm-hmm. So I mean, this week has been extremely, extremely stressful and extremely overwhelming with all these awful news. And I think, yeah, for me, it's really to keep in mind the bigger picture, and to work really hard towards that. Yes, it might take, years maybe, but I don't think that with the defeatist attitude, anything's gonna change. So it's really to focus on that and to really work, to collaborate with everyone who works on China or who works on this issue, because sometimes like just people in this, I guess in this kind of work, it's like there's so many people working in this, and then sometimes not everyone agrees on the same thing, which is normal. We're like millions of Uyghurs, and we can't expect everyone to, you know, have the same opinions or views. But I think what's important is to keep the bigger picture in mind, that to remember that we're all working towards the same goal, and that is to, you know, win the human rights cause against the CCP and get our freedom and human rights back. So I think it's really important that we focus on that, and not all of the little things that might come on our path doing that.
Definitely. And how would you define success in activism? What does that mean to you?
I guess like it's different things for me. Definitely, it can be. I see success even in the smallest victories, and I also see successes in losses, I guess, because you can always find a silver lining. I think for me is success is mostly, obviously it's great if, you know, like concrete actions are taken, like sanctions or whatever concrete, you know, that's great. But I think also on the smaller scale, just maybe informing someone about the ongoing the genocide or the ongoing human rights atrocities in East Turkistan, that's also success. So I don't think I think there are like different degrees of success, but there isn't just one version, I believe.
Yeah, that makes sense. And for youth that are starting to look into activism themselves, what advice would you give for some youth that are, you know, looking to engage with the community and start taking on some activism?
Yeah, that's a good question. But I would always say to kind of always start with your own community. That's like where, you know, you can really have a direct impact. And because that's the thing, everything is kind of interrelated. If you help your community, you're helping the Uyghur cause as well, because these are your people, and our communities sometimes can be fragile, and you know, having more help or support can really make a difference. So I think like everyone should start with their own communities. But if you're, you know, looking to do more, then you can, I don't know, contact your MPs, your local senators or officials, and let them know, because that's one thing that people often don't know, is that they're super accessible because we elected them. We have power over them or leverage over them because they are sitting in that office because of citizens. So as citizens, you have to, I mean, we're living in democratic countries, I mean, Canada. So, you know, just call them, write them an email. It's really not that complicated. And then you can also meet them and in person. I mean, maybe not right now, but post-corona, and tell them, because this is how we start actions. These people will then push for their higher officials, and then, you know, it's gonna go bigger and bigger. And other than that, you can also, you know, participate in conferences, local conferences you have, or push for conferences to happen. Especially with the local communities there, or volunteer at different NGOs, prioritize Uyghur NGOs. And if you don't have Uyghur NGOs in your local community, you can also look for like other known NGOs like Amnesty or Human Rights Watch. They have, you know, offices pretty much everywhere, and they work on the Uyghur cause as well. So you can bring that to the table. And other than that, you can, I mean, donate. That's one way to help, you know. That's kind of, I think, sometimes like people don't necessarily think about it, but donate to, you know, known or Uyghur NGOs, or, you know, whatever. Like Darman Foundation, Uyghur Congress, refugees campaigns, all these things can help and make a real difference. You can sign petitions. I know there are so many petitions out there, but you can select, like really relevant ones that can actually make an impact. And then I think the most important thing is just to stay updated on what's happening and just read material about the issue. There are so many things out there. You can visit our website. We have so many like insightful documents, reports, material that you can use. And yeah, like there's just so many ways. And I mean, if you need help or anything, just, you can draft me, like send me an email. I'll be happy to, answer other questions. But
amazing. And I guess one more question before we move on to the Q&A. It's no surprise that when you are on the path to success when it comes to activism, you do end up experiencing a bunch of losses and disappointments. How do you deal with that? And what advice would you give to youth that, end up facing those same hurdles and losses themselves?
Yeah, I guess that's a good question because it kind of reiterates what the first panelist was saying is about mental health is, it kind of is linked to that because we don't talk about mental health that much in the Uyghur community, but I think it's definitely very important. I've had really like couple of hard days since I started because, since I started, I've completely cut off ties with my family back in East Turkistan. I mean, my immediate family is in Canada, but all my relatives are back home, and that was really hard. And I know that, a lot of Uyghurs have, their immediate family in concentration camps, but I don't think we can compare, and everyone's situation is different. And for me, that was kind of difficult, but I was, I was prepared for that. That's why I took this job. But that doesn't make it less hard. And I've also heard that my aunt she started getting questioned by the local authorities. So that was also heartbreaking because it felt like, I caused all of this trouble, and I put that on her. But I just remembered again the bigger picture. It's, my aunt is one out of millions of Uyghurs suffering there, and we've tried being silent so many, like for decades, and look where it led us. Whether you're silent or not, you have no guarantee, no safety, no assurance that the Chinese government will respect the human rights of the Uyghur people back home. At least if you're vocal about what's happening, you'll bring international attention, and the international pressure will then maybe result into concrete action and solve this problem. So I think for me, the most helpful was that, and also having a really supportive, entourage, surroundings, my family, my friends. Having that is extremely important, but also having the same people who do the same kind of work in this work is essential. I, like my peers, I just, all the time I have, we speak, and then that kind of makes me feel like I'm not alone in this. And whether it's my Uyghur peers, Tibetan peers, any other peers, it's very helpful to do that, to create a strong, like a family or friend support around you.
Of course, that makes sense. It's like a little community to fall back on whenever you yourself are kind of
exactly.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for the inspiring messages. I'm sure that all of our viewers have, learned so much from your experiences. As mentioned before, we are going to have a live Q&A right now with Zumretay. So if you guys have any questions, I believe everybody has kind of a feature on Zoom where you can raise your hand and we can unmute you to give you an opportunity to ask your question. If you're uncomfortable with doing that, you can also type your question in the chat. I know some people may find it easier to just type it down there and I can read out your question out loud. But yeah, if anybody has any questions for Zumretay about her experiences or anything at all, you guys can take some time to ask those questions right now. Just gonna see if anyone Please, anything? Chat. I guess we'll give people a couple of minutes.
I see my sister there. Definitely recognize some of my Montreal community members and friends.
I do have one question actually right here. Let's see. So I guess one question we have is that sometimes youth may feel discouraged from entering the world of activism because obviously there are older people who are a little bit more experienced with how to go about that process. So what would you kind of suggest in a situation like that? How can youth, like really young people, make a difference?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, because that was kind of, I guess, how I viewed it before starting as well. Because if you look at most of these NGOs, like most of the time it's led by older generation and mostly men, and you can get intimidated by that. But I think it's important to look beyond that and also to kind of establish dialogue with them or start a conversation. But I think having figures, younger figures in this advocacy also helps, because this is how, I mean, before me there was another young girl who was working in my position, Shahrazad Khairat, who now works at RFA. But when she was working there and I saw that she was working, I was like, wow, like, you know, there's a place for young Uyghur girls in these NGOs, and that really motivated me. So I do hope that our presence, especially the youth and the female youth, kind of gives hope and encourages people to be more involved. Because I mean, I've said this more like this afternoon in the Uyghur panel, is that after this old generation, what's left, it's us. So if we don't start, you know, getting involved, then we're just gonna be left with nothing. Because I mean, yes, these older generations, but they've done so much work for over 20 years. They've been the ones doing all this work alone. So we can, you know, just we need to pass the baton. We need to keep this going, and we need to be more involved and not just let the appearance of, you know, kind of discourage us, but to really push and hope. I really hope that, you know, having us in these positions kind of helps the transition and also facilitate the people reaching out to us.
Definitely, yeah, that makes sense. And then I guess kind of going off of that question, that was about people in activism themselves. What about youth who are trying to get into activism but getting kind of backlash from outside communities telling them that, you know, these are small things and they won't really make any sort of change? Because I have seen that attitude sometimes when it comes to activism, like, well, what is your protest going to do? It's not going to do anything. Yeah. What would you say to that?
Yeah, that's something that I always get asked, and people are always kind of attacking the, you know, comment section on social media. But I think it's, if you stay silent, then what? Like, what's gonna happen? You know? Yeah, like, it's a protest, but then at least you're speaking. You're choosing you know, to speak out, and you know, you can't point fingers like that. You have to act in any possible way, and you know, what's possible for me might not necessarily be for you. But if you can do it within your own abilities and capabilities, then go for it. Yes, it's a protest, yes, it's a petition, but you're at least doing something concrete. And you know, I don't think that small actions go unnoticed. They definitely do make a difference. You know, like, if just like tagging brands. I don't know if you know MEP Raphael Glucksmann. He's a parliament member at the European Parliament. We work closely with him, and he he's been amazing. He's one of the most vocal supporters of this cause, and he really took this cause and, you know, made it his. And now with the recent like forced labor you know, reporting coming out, he really took this on him too. He identified all of the 83 brands that were named in the ACPI report, who were said that they had their supply chains involved in forced labor. And he, you know, he took it to Instagram, basically, not even Twitter. It was just mostly Instagram. And he started writing and tagging these companies directly on Instagram to get their attention. And he asked his audience, his followers, to do the same in the comment section of like Nike, Adidas, Lacoste. And he managed to get Lacoste and Adidas to agree to end, you know, using Uyghur forced labor in their supply chains. Yeah. So, I mean, it started small, but look at the impact. Now he's doing that with the rest of the companies. So and that was made possible because of all the followers who tagged these brands. I mean, it's such a simple action, but then it made a huge difference. So I don't think we can just say it's just a protest. It's just because defeatist attitudes will never change anything.
For sure, I agree. I think we had another question in the chat. Somebody asking if you feel there's a possibility that East Turkistan can be free, which is a very loaded question. But if you have anything you want to say about that, you can definitely touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there is, of course. I think if it was our homeland, then it is destined to, you know, return to us. But before that, I think we need to really focus on like really ending what's happening, but at the same time, of course, fight for our freedom. But they don't go, they're not like mutually exclusive, I would say. But I think there's a time and there's a time for everything. There's a time and place for everything. And right now, this is, I think, you know, talking about genocide and then talking about freedom might be difficult to do at the same time. So maybe one thing at a time, but I definitely do believe that we can be free one day.
For sure, definitely, I agree. We actually have somebody who has their hand raised, Elif Mohammed, so I'm going to unmute them so that they could answer their question. Or sorry, ask a question. You can go ahead.
How was your experience when you left your relatives, when you left East Turkestan?
Thank you, Elif. Such a cute voice. I mean, I was really young when I left East Turkestan. I was 10, so for me it was just like going on a big trip, and I wasn't really realizing what was happening to the full, I guess, full extent. But it definitely, yeah. But once I realized that we could maybe not go back or like, you know, have our previous life, it was kind of, it might have been like weird, but I think the hardest part is just family. It's just family, and you just miss them all the time, constantly, especially now that I've, you know, started this work. And my grandma passed away in 2017, and I couldn't even go back to, you know, her funerals or anything. And to think about, you know, all these difficult times, and you can't even choose to go back, or whenever you miss your country, just going back, it seems such, like, for me right now, when I think about it, it seems such a distant reality. And not, you know, like, it's far, like geographically far, but also like because of what's happening right now, it just seems so distant from my reality. And I actually remember when I was in India in November for a conference, and I had this really weird feeling when I was flying over India to go to where I was gonna go. And we kind of, passed next to East Turkistan, and my heart was just pounding, and I was like, wow, I can't believe, like, it feels like I'm in my country, or like I'm, it's crazy to think that I'm kind of next to it, but I can't enter. And when I was in India, I was the whole time I was like heartbroken because I couldn't even go back. And if I could have, I would have gone. And it was kind of strange, but yeah, definitely that's really hard to think about that.
And that's like the case with a lot of these cases of minority groups facing genocide, is that there's at some point there's almost no home to go back to, and that reality is really scary to kind of think about. Thank you so much, Elif, for that question. I'm reading that she's 10 years old and from Ottawa, so very brave of her to come on here and ask you that. We have a couple more questions in the chat. I guess someone's asking how we can get people more aware of what's happening in East Turkestan and with Uyghurs, and in the streets as well, like how we can educate people who aren't aware of what's happening right at the moment.
There are so many different ways. Again, I come back to this all the time, but just start with your surroundings, with friends, because sometimes it's I just remember when I was in high school, I would just, whenever I got the opportunity to talk about East Turkestan, or when I was in college, in my different political science classes, I would always bring it back to East Turkestan whenever we talked about something. And I was like, but this is happening in East Turkestan, and people would be like, what, wait, where is East Turkestan, what is happening? I would always like take that opportunity and bring that up, and then I remember like some of my colleagues or classmates, they would call me and they were like, we're so grateful that you explained it to us, and we definitely learned a lot, and we're actually talking about it now at supper with our family. So like it's also like it goes like that. But I guess in bigger ways, I think the most important tool that you have right now is social media. Definitely, because we all have an audience. Maybe it's small, maybe it's big, it doesn't matter. People can circulate this message, and I've seen, obviously I use social media, and Instagram has been extremely kind of, I think, useful in that sense, because most of the times, like nowadays, people just get lazy. They don't want to, spend so much time reading the news. But I like Instagram. I'd go on Instagram and all I see is Uyghur news. All I see is that. And all I post is Uyghur news as well. So I think people, even with the Black Lives Movement, Instagram was a, really key tool. And I think we need to really learn how to use these tools at our advantage and how to use it effectively. And I think also like, don't harm the advocacy movement by posting things that are not true. You always have to be careful in what you post, have to verify like where this thing came from. You can't just post anything that shows like pops up on your WhatsApp, or people just keep transferring messages or videos on WhatsApp or Twitter. Don't take anything for what it is. Just always make sure to know where it comes from, and if you have reliable information, always post from sources that are reliable, because that's used by China to attack us and to counter, to have a counter argument or narrative. So if we want to fight that, if we want to avoid that, then we have to be extremely careful in what we post.
Definitely. That's great advice. Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to conclude the Q&A, but I do see that some other people might have questions. And if that's the case, Zumretay, if you want to like link your social media handle or your email in the chat, I'm sure people would benefit from that greatly.
I'll leave my email.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, that concludes that. So I want to thank you one more time, Zumretay, for joining us for not one, but two conferences today. I know you have a huge time difference where you are in Germany. So I believe it's like past midnight where you are.
Yeah, it's 1 o'clock.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, thank you so much on behalf of Dharma Foundation for joining us. You were amazing today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.